All righty, we got Dougie here. The Transit Authority, Episode 2, a conversation with Doug Kelsey, General Manager of TriMet in Portland, Oregon. All right, let's see what he's got to say. Snappy music.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Transit Authority. I am Art Gazzetti, Vice President for Policy and Mobility at the American Public Transportation Association. We have a great guest for today's program.
APTA. APTA is the, what do you call those groups that exist to promote the various industries they represent? It's like a public relations thing, but there's another word for it, but I can't think of it. Anyway, APTA does all the cheering. I know they're like a cheerleader for public transportation. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just telling you who they are.
My good friend Doug Kelsey, General Manager of one of America's premier.
Yeah, they all know each other. All these people are connected. This entire industrial complex is connected. All of these people are insiders of the industrial complex.
Transit agencies, TriMet in Portland, Oregon. Hello, Doug.
Hello, Art. Great to be here.
Hey, thank you, Doug. And it's needless to say, it's challenging times where transit agencies across the country and the globe. Health and economic crisis has been brought on by the pandemic. In many ways, transit has been heroes in the occasion. Could you tell me the steps TriMet has taken to serve your region and to keep your services available to the public, to connect them, and to keep things clean and healthy?
Well, yeah, you bet, Art. I know everybody is going through this globally, not just locally here. In Portland, Oregon, when this hit, I think we were all scrambling, frankly, particularly where the supply chain had broken down. And not only hospitals weren't getting proper PPE, well, neither were we, as we tried to, you try to live your vision, mission, and values for your customers, as well as your staff and your contracts. We couldn't even get basic supplies. So, literally we had many policies that weren't even invented because we had not faced this before in such an accelerated time. So the first thing we did was, for me strategically, was to make sure our team was stable. So I set out a set of several strategic principles for the immediate, middle, and what I believe is to be the long term. Let me walk you through those. The first one was, it was very clear to me, this was not normal, and we were headed for a severe or significant recession, or yes, some people even referred to depression, hopefully not, and let alone how long. So this was a significant hit to us. So maintaining cash flow and financial flexibility was going to be key. The second strategic principle was to preserve jobs. And so this wasn't about
which you didn't do in the instance of the Lyft drivers, although some of them went and were delivering meals, but I believe that's over. So the Lyft people all got laid off. I don't think any TriMet people got laid off. Of course, the only ones that will get laid off, if they're layoffs, are the bus drivers. Capital Projects is functioning fully, 100%, and marketing and all the rest of them are still there, as far as I know. I haven't heard anything to the contrary.
Salary increases. This is about a higher calling of keeping the jobs we have, knowing how valuable they are, and the talent, the intellectual talent that we've got.
Yeah, right.
The third principle I put in place was preserve service to the ability possible.
Well, the first thing they did was cut service immediately. It's like, okay, we're cutting service 20% immediately. That was immediate. Of course, they were having staffing problems. People were sick, but
driven by demand and financial well-being. But all of that on a basis that no matter what, we will not compromise safety under any circumstance. I'll shut rail lines down, I'll shut bus lines down, but that is not up for a discussion. So
all right,
those are my corner posts, my guiding corner post, of which how we responded. Yes, we reduced service, our commuter rail. I can walk everybody through all this, probably similar statistics from around the globe. I won't tie that time up. Yes, we're down significantly like everybody else. So we also set up a set of service principles, Art, that really got to, we are going to get people to need health care and set up our service lines, our bus and rail lines, without taking away one bus line. We may alter service frequency, but we are also going to keep primary focused on low-income people who have no other choice as an essential service. And we are going to make sure we maintain the frequencies needed to key healthcare facilities. So we literally devised a set of contraction and expansion type of principles, of which we are still monitoring and managing to today. So there was the highest set of strategic principles, and then there's the tactical, what we're going to do underneath that, of which we have used to manage our network and maintain trust with the public as an essential service.
Did you tweak or redo your network in any way, or did you just adjust service levels on existing routes?
Basically, adjusted service levels on existing routes. There was so much chaos out there. Adding adjustments to routes, I think, would caused extra problems, Art, for us. That's something we may look at and contemplate down the road. But stage one was getting through just the basics and keep giving people confidence they could use us.
Are there any technologies or special products that you've always been an innovator, anything like that? Ultraviolet, some people were considering anything like that.
Yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, it got, everybody could contribute to this. So some things on the product side that we did, and I'll get to the services side in a sec, what I'll consider somewhat innovative, is it was very clear to me. The first thing was what we thought were going to be basic bus barriers to help with assaults and things of that nature for operators. Very clear to me, whether it be COVID-19, COVID-20, H1N1, SARS, there's going to be other viruses. So we rapidly moved to the decision of putting bus barriers on all part of our fleet at millions of dollars. So as a secondary form of defense.
It's been done a year ago, but since it's something for bus drivers, it's last on the list. Capital projects first, what bus drivers need last.
Is that innovative? No, it's protection. On the innovative side, what we did do is we were literally, when we couldn't get sanitizer, my executive assistant, myself, and our head of procurement, a fellow named Nate Griffin, we were actually making cocktailed sanitizer on my boardroom table because we couldn't get it from the supply chain. So I said, well, okay, what would MacGyver do? Right? So we were literally mixing cocktails on my boardroom table that if we couldn't rely on them, we've got to be able to be self-reliant here at some point. And then tying into, distillery producers, things of that nature, which are now as secondary commonplace alternatives. What we also did is we've also now have 36 fogging units for our buses. So each night, at about not quite $250,000, we've got fogging units that fog every bus to a 99.9% disinfectant level. So we know they're going out clean as possibly could be. That doesn't escape wiping them down. So we're also testing, UV lights as well. So I think we're still in the pioneering stage of that right now, Art. In fact, I picked that one up out of China about 2:00 in the morning. As I was trying to say, okay, they were kind of ahead of us, and so what could we learn from them? So that's where I picked it up, and lo and behold, a great American manufacturer, and that's who we're still piloting some of that, the right application. That would be for buses, but so far not for trains because of all the electrical that we've seen so far for the fogging units. So I'm hopeful the UV units offer promise. I would like to get us to battery charged ones. So eventually, over time, our operators can grab one and wand their area at the end of a turnaround of a loop or some semblance, so to get them engaged in the ownership.
Doug, on the ultraviolet, is it possible to use that with people on board, while in service, or do you have to do that at night when things are people aren't on?
Well, right now we're playing it safe. We're doing it without. I have seen examples where people are indicating that it's possible to do it while in play. We're going to need medical advice and technical advice on that, what the probability of that is a long-term as you pass through the blue light, so to speak. Heaven forbid we're going to have Black Sabbath posters back up soon too. So, can we do those kinds of things? So we're open to that. So we're pioneering and innovating to the degree that we can, but we're also got to get pragmatic and quick too.
Well, you're doing all those things, to keep the public safe. How do you give them the confidence and the perception that all is well, they can come back and ride?
This is the billion-dollar question. So it's our job to figure out the customer. They don't have to figure us out. So I think we were the first transit authority that I'm aware of in North America. I think others are doing it now, where I committed to the governor of our state that we are going to put masks. We are supplying masks to every customer who wants them on all our buses and all our trains.
You might be right about that. I did check that out. And I think TriMet was the first transit agency to give away masks. I think that's true. It's true.
Trains. And so we're actually designed kind of
the first American train. I mean, they were doing this in Asia. It's been no deal anywhere else but in the United States.
Please take one, masked if need be. Hopefully people have their own, but we've got to ensure there is high confidence of that. So we are in the mask supply business now for our customers, not just our staff. Secondly, we're also putting hand sanitizers, Art, at the same location. So you can tap with our smart card, grab a mask, hit the squirt bottle or whatever it is, a foam of sanitizer, and go back and we'll have one on, I think, the exit side of our buses as well. So we are doubling down on this. And in addition to this, when finances are really fragile and headed the downward trend, I'm adding probably 130 more cleaners onto the system on top of the ones I've already got to get to a standard of cleanliness of 4 hours or better for all our vehicles and key touch points. So I'm investing at a time when I would rather be de-investing to ensure our financial viability. Because if we don't get to the confidence of the public, they're not coming.
They're not coming. No
looking forward, what would be your vision of where the transit industry is 6
He's quite a cheerleader, isn't he? He's pretty damn good.
months from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now? And please feel free to address that either from a Portland perspective or a national perspective, transit, or a combination of both.
Sure. I was asked, I think, as you may be aware, to be with 5 or 6 CEOs that Jane Williams, the FTA administrator, asked us to speak as CEOs, GMs on, and that was one of the topics. And for me, it's very clear that, again, if the customer does not feel safe and secure, they're not coming no matter how much we market or how much we discount. In fact, they won't even come if it's free, many of them, outside of the essential side.
At that point.
So we are going to face...
You mean outside of the transit dependent? Some people have no choice.
For a period of time, and I used to be in the oil business, as you know, low oil prices. So that's a dragger down to say it's actually cheaper to stay in my car. So with these challenging dynamics, safety, security is the base that we've got to work from. So we as an industry, and here in Portland, that's why the examples I shared are, I'm doubling down on the first step of you should trust us because it's clean. That should not be the reason you don't choose us. So if we can get past that, I'm personally of the belief the industry needs to reform. And I felt this, Art, you and I have had conversations on this over the years for a long time, right?
Yes.
And we can't keep coming back to the trough that only money will get us out of this. And so we need to reinvent our value proposition. For those who just want to be a commuter, that's wonderful. But I think, we're piloting right now other ways to bring value. Things like Wi-Fi on our system that bring value that may be expensive on the short term, but of high value to our riders in their cost of their own lifestyle using our system. We need to be optimizing, speeding our system up. We need to change policies like transit-oriented development, conscious policies that tilt the playing field ahead of the single occupant vehicle, that it's not about, I need money to run a new train or a new bus. We need to take advantage and drive density through our policies so more users literally sit and live right next to where we actually reside. So we've got to feed the beast, if you will, through these policies, and we need governments to do it. There should be policies where, for all, whether the municipal, the regional, the county, the state, the federal, if you're a government agency, you need to start relocating your services for yourself and to the public on rapid transit corridors. Right, and we've got to get past that build and they will come, where we've got buildings and counties and municipalities where it makes no sense. They got a cheap deal on land, and that we're paying an immense unproductive support structure to do that. So I think we need to leverage and make our assets sweat more, and we need to come up with new products.
I don't know.
Let me give you an example of a product.
Talk.
It's not introduced yet. I piloted this in Vancouver, if you remember, at the rail convention up there a number of years ago.
Don't get fired up
It's
there.
a headset tour. So it's not for peak use, it's for off-peak use. We're looking at multi-language that tells the story using our base infrastructure of a tourist tour, multi-language. So you can, and it could be for educational tours for schools and field trips, new immigrants coming in who often go to use public transportation to get oriented to a city, whether it be in Portland or LA or Cleveland or Miami. So we've got to be product-driven, not ops-driven. Our culture is so voracious as an ops culture, but that's not a customer culture. And so I believe that we are going to have to continue to be good at our operations, which our industry really is, but we're going to have to use things like our smart cards. That why aren't they interchangeable amongst all the different cities? Of people who have money, who take airplanes, and yes, we'll get back to taking airplanes again, that a whole group just says, do I take an Uber, a Lyft, a taxi, or transit?
Yeah.
Well, why don't we in New York and Philadelphia and Miami,
Blah, blah, blah.
the Octopus Card in London, why aren't we using interchangeable value? And so we own that.
Yeah, Doug, is there a way, you've been a leader in mobility as a service, trying to push that along. And there was a trend before COVID, might we able to use the current pandemic as a way to help accelerate trends that were already in place, such as mobility as a service, open fare payment, open, mobility data, all of that stuff.
Well, to open payment, as you know, Portland here was the one who authored open payment globally, long before my time. So all the mothers and fathers before me deserve all that credit. We did it in Vancouver, BC, when I was up at TransLink with open payment, smart card too. It's the way to go. So yes, we need to use the crisis to create new ways and rip up our scar tissue of our historic assumptions. Let me give you an example of
He's a talker. I really like talkers. Remember that, the Game of Thrones? You're a talker. The Hound.
I think another value increaser to help us. From my own viewpoint, having worked in Starbucks and retailing and 6 Olympic Games around the world, we have, this is back from the ops to customer culture. When you hit the mark, you've hit the mark. You feel it, right? And the customers respond accordingly, but the mark is not static. And so we need to remove the frictions from our customer experience because we have many.
It's not a market, okay? This is a problem with neoliberal administration of transit districts. It's not a market. You're supposed to provide public transportation, okay? It's not to be looked at from a, quote, market, because there is no market. There's no free market, okay? It's all bullshit at this point. Don't even talk about it, okay? Because we know it's bullshit. They're printing trillions right now, and you're talking about market?
Going up to a ticket vending machine, and I'm in the industry, and I think if everybody has a real gut check, everyone has their own rhythm. We all get free transit typically. But when you go to another city, WMATA, Washington, does a great job. Paul's doing an amazing job out there, right? I go to a ticket vending machine because I'm new to the city. I'm looking for help. Because it reminds me of ordering my first drink when I went to Starbucks, a decaf, no foam. I don't know the language, and it's actually unnerving. So we need to come up with more seamless ways that the customer has to figure out their trip. The reality is they're making combinations of trips.
He's just talking about stuff that's irrelevant, really. I mean, he's just talking about, bells and whistles is what he's talking about.
Trips to an Uber, to a Lyft, to cycling, to walking. Oh yeah, transit is part of that too. I believe there's a significant prize that using technology, when we can say, you tell me where you want to go, we're going to list out all the options of time and price and combinations. And that's the key, is combinations. And then you choose what you want and we'll execute it on your behalf. And so we also are going to need to build up our buying power. And with it, then we can negotiate with the Ubers and Lyfts. I used to do this in the oil business when I was at Shell. Then when you've got market power, you can get discounts that you can reinvest back in yourself. If not, we leave it to the Ubers and Lyfts of the world. They're going to use our customer base and just drain our customer base for their profit advantage. I believe we have an amazing opportunity here to shape the market, to control it, but we have to acknowledge transit isn't the only way you get there. It's just part of a palette of satisfying the customer's options. Those who get there are going to win, I believe.
Well, it sounds like you're looking for ways to build back better, Doug, and I commend you for that. And I do want to bring up that cities across the nation have done much soul searching over the past 2 weeks in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. The issue of race and social equity has come to the fore again. And I want to ask you, Doug, what role does public transportation play in social equity and serving the community?
This is a question of such deep hurt and feeling, and needs a resolution for society here. I got to tell you, this is gut-wrenching, frankly, and it's soul-searching, and it should be soul-searching, because we can't advance, I think, as a nation until we frankly take this on. What happened to George Floyd and many others is totally unacceptable. It really is. And so, TriMet has taken this. I sent a letter out to all employees. Happy to send it to you. We have nothing to hide. We need to be transparent as to culture, whether I'm left-handed or right-handed or 6'9" or what religion I am or ethnicity. The systemic racism must be voraciously attacked. It's not acceptable in a society today. And so transportation, firstly, we have to role model it personally. The tone at the top, starting with me here, I have to role model it, right? And so part of what I did when I came as general manager, even before the recent compression of this issue and raising to the forefront, and rightfully so, I had to evolve my executive team and its diversity and its culture. So it starts with me. I can't change who I am. I am a white male. I'm from Canada. I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of it, but everybody should be equally proud of their heritage. Not getting in watching a police car behind them with a stomach knot as they drive ahead in a car, or they get on a transit vehicle. Here comes transit police or something. So we need to role model it at the senior levels. We need to get rid of it if it's in our organization, and swiftly. And then we need to take a stand with internally as well as the public.
And we know Portland is the whitest city in America, and we also know that Oregon was founded as a white utopia. That was the intent. They changed it, but blacks were explicitly forbidden from living in Oregon. The good old MAGA days.
And also be willing to listen as an industry to make needed change. For example, I've just authorized today, we are going to be having armbands made up a month from now on the day of George Floyd's sad passing, and we are going to stop our transit for a minute. We're going to start acknowledging him. I'm considering things like actually having a mural and artwork made for him. Okay. Not as a human being of that tragic loss, but we need to memorialize what it...
It's full speed ahead. Government is really, I don't know. I guess they're trying to placate the masses here. I'm not sure what's going on with all of this.
Was and what it is. And we need to put a name on it, and we need to be champions of this. But this is not our sole responsibility, but we need to be also willing to listen. And maybe in ways, even for me, in ways I haven't. And so I think having a period of listening is going to be really important to be able to advance this conversation and being part of the regions that each of us respectively serve. But what is for sure, it's getting very clear what it's not. What we now need to figure out is what it becomes, to call this out quicker and then make these investments. So looking at our own transit police forces, maybe in ways that we haven't before. How do we do in fair inspections? Even for communities of color, our employee EAP programs that we each respectively have. Do we need to have special focus sessions? Are we meeting their needs, communities of color? So I think all the assumptions should be questioned. And I think that's a really healthy thing. So I think we're going to have to hit this on many fronts. And I am taking to the board, ironically, just this month, and it's been in the works for about a year, is our own equity lens and a strategy that we're going to embark on in this organization.
Very well said, Doug, and I thank you for...
Oh, jeez. If only they would concentrate on providing more buses and trains. That's all you need to do. But they're all off on the other... They're all off on all these other tangents here, you know, which is why public transportation has been such a failure in everywhere. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
With that. Folks, let's take a moment for a short break and then rejoin our guest, Doug Kelsey.
APTA continues to monitor the impact of the
sector. Might I ask you what kind of, say, lessons that one can bring from the private sector to the public sector and vice versa? Public sector lessons that one might bring, and does it strengthen you to have...
It's called a revolving door of government and private industry. It's where insiders move between the two seamlessly. It's another scam, you know. These are an elite class of people that give themselves jobs with each other. That's who they are. Let's be honest. Let's not bullshit. It's a crony capitalism type of system.
Experience in both.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, everybody's journey art is different. And I'm just one person in my working time here. Before I turn over to somebody who's going to do a way better job than I ever will, right? And so...
See, he just admitted it. He just admitted he's a careerist. He's not going to be here that long. He's a careerist. He'll go on to some other thing. Doesn't mean anything to him, basically.
But through my different experiences, you know, the private sector has some advantages over the public sector. Having worked in both in multinational organizations, is the private sector can walk away from customers it doesn't want to serve, right? What? And so on the other side, the public sector has to deal with complex policy that the private sector may never have to deal with. The private sector also has to make a return on investment, and it pays tax. The public sector has an amazing competitive advantage, where in fact...
Oh, they do? Who pays tax? Not Amazon, not Microsoft. I guess the small businesses do. The big corporations, they don't pay tax. The rich, they don't pay tax. Who's paying the tax?
A number of years ago up in Vancouver, BC, we worked, I won't say with a large multinational company, to take over SkyTrain because it was run by the public. It's still, which it is today. But what we did is we ran it so efficiently with almost a 95% and up to 100% operating cost recovery that there was no bubbles of opportunity for the private sector to come in and take advantage of government's lethargy, or maybe it did.
That whole argument that somehow private company is more efficient is a lie. It's a complete lie. Multiple studies have shown that's not true. So he's bullshitting. He's doing very good. I mean, this is great bullshit, isn't it? It's just spectacular bullshit. So it just comes right off of his mouth, like nice. He can go on and on and on. We've seen this at board meetings, and he knows how to talk.
Things as tight as the private sector might.
He's a talker.
I don't think anyone. I could show you a list of very poorly run companies and a graveyard of Chapter 11 companies that no longer exist.
No. Right now, we have multiple bankrupt companies that are existing. Guess why? They're getting Fed dollars, bailouts, helicopter money. There is no free market. Stop that nonsense. Stop lying about it.
Conversely, I could show you a list of government agencies, not just in transit, that really aren't well run. So I come from the assumption that no one has a monopoly on doing it right. And I think everyone has to learn from each other.
Of course, government's not accountable at all. I mean, theoretically, a business has to make money or it can't survive. Government's the opposite. It doesn't matter how they run. They have tax base. And that's really the problem. And what's happened in this country, of course, is that the tax funds have been hijacked by the ruling class for their benefit and not for the benefit of the people.
from different industries and different experiences. And I think that's where there's a real opportunity of a Venn diagram. There are some practices in private sector absolutely have no applicability to the public sector, and vice versa. So I'm a bit agnostic to this. So who can bring best value? You know, when I was asked, when I was applying for the general manager job here a few years ago now, 2.5 years ago now, one of the folks asked me, are you for union or are you for management? That was one of the questions in a public environment. And how I responded, and I'll respond the same way here. I'm for options. And so I think we should all have as many options as possible. There's many times.
He's a talker, man. He's a talker. He knows how to talk.
Times where labor is better than what the private sector non-contractor will do. We just need to know the sweet spot where each can contribute the best, that ultimately it's management's job to pull this cocktail or recipe together to execute the best service, the safest way possible for the best value.
I wonder if I'll get a copyright strike if I put this up.
Bring me one of those chickens.
You got money to pay for it?
You paid for it?
No. But we're the king's men. So, you got money?
Not a penny. I'll still take that chicken.
Tell you what. We'll trade you. One of our little chickens for one of yours. Give us a go at your friend.
Lowell there likes them a bit broken in.
You're a talker. Listening to talkers makes me thirsty.
So as I said, I'm agnostic to it, but everyone can contribute to innovation. Everybody owns risk. How you get there often is built on a lot of history things that you wouldn't do again.
For that.
But we are where we are. But the one thing private sector does quicker, they move nimbler and quicker than the public sector does. Mm-hmm. And we need to learn from that one in today's environment.
We have to.
There's that nimbler. I hate that. Oh, God. Don't say that word. Fuck.
Have to work on that. Doug, I want to ask you some questions about Portland, which is, I think a very unique city. It's a very transit-friendly city. You can tell just by going there. And my experience has been, it almost speaks to you that you can get around here without a car. But you've also, of course, built a very pedestrian-friendly city.
Yeah, right.
You have a bike-friendly city. And I want to ask you about the synergy there. Like, for example, you have an entertainment.
Most of that is bullshit. You know that, right? The idea that Portland is some kind of mecca for all these things is just a result of a great public relations departments. But it's not basically true. I mean, this transit system stops running early, doesn't work on the weekends. I've heard Jonathan Mouse talk all the time about how much spike infrastructure is needed. But, the public relations and these career technocrats here, they're pumped this idea out into the mainstream, and then they've got this reputation that's really not deserved.
Payment zone, right? That you can't drive there. Am I right? Do you find that actually to enhance the use of transit? And same with the bikes. By having bike, how does the synergy work between all of those?
It's ridiculous.
This is a great question, and this gets back to the policy discussion, not just the investment discussion, right? And it's very clear. This region, since I've lived here 4.5 years now, inclusion in policy is at the very underpinnings of how they do their business. Now, I'm going to be a little controversial. Sometimes, in my mind, process here is bigger than the needed outcome, but they still have a lot of great outcomes. And this is a great city. It really is, in a great region. But the evidence is we are not finished our work here yet. So you have to combine what transit does and needs to be leveraged, combined with the policy changes and the experiences we want to create for the right behaviors. So for example, the TOD we talked about earlier, transit-oriented development, that's a foundational instrument. And frankly, this region is moving to there. Just last month at our board meeting, TriMet introduced our first very comprehensive TOD policy. I believe it's one of the most strategic things that beyond the central business district, TOD on our services as an industry has to get way beyond the CBD. Most CBDs are pretty good, right? And because you've got the synergy of scale and policy and such like that. But it is a combination of, and why TriMet, I took to our board a few years ago, and a really compliment to our board. We moved ourselves from a transit authority, Art, to a mobility agency. So you go, okay, what is that? So what it means to me is we're moving ourselves to be part of the conversation and acknowledging there are many ways to get around that are good, that it's not transit only. And if we can get to the lowest common denominator of the best experience possible in the least way, it may be better for you to cycle, or you get a transit train downtown and then you get a scooter and grab from there to get where you want to go. So this is the difference between an operating transit culture and an experience culture. So then you web in and take advantage of all the great work that's being done here and in other cities around rose lanes to speed up, and then in improving your bus stops, improving the technology of the system, sharing the knowledge of the system of transit signal priority. The region's still lurking through TSP, let alone queue jumper lanes, things of that nature. That part of it is acknowledging what you've done is a great base here, but there's an immense amount more to do. The evidence is TriMet has about 4.2% transit market share. I was fortunate last fall to be invited.
2.4%. 2.4% market share. It's like nothing.
With the governor of our state to go overseas with her, and we went to some other European cities. And their modal shares,
around the world,
44%, 42%, etc.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of unfinished work to do. We have a great base, but we need to be insatiable around what's possible. And I'd say the same thing applies to all agencies beyond transit in their respective cities. And this is where we've got to get to mobility as a culture and the experience piece. If we stay as just ops.
See, this is where they've gone wrong. This is all wrong. This is where the whole public transportation industrial complex went off the rails when they stopped thinking about providing only public transportation and started adding all this other shit in. That's when people stopped riding it.
We're going to struggle. And we're also vulnerable to many private sector folks who are highly capitalized.
What?
Who may choose to get into our grocery business like Amazon did to somebody else. And they could be market disruptors. And if we are not market driven rather than supply driven.
It's ridiculous. His whole thesis is wrong. I'm just pointing it out. You have nothing to do with the market. You're tax funded. You can't go out of business. You haven't cared about ridership in a decade. Ridership has been flat for a decade, even though the population kept rising and rising and rising. They never captured any more riders because it's not, once they started with the light rail, people stopped using it. And that's not just in Portland. That's happened in multiple cities. The light rail is not as easy to use as a very comprehensive bus service.
That's how Blockbuster ended its journey. What? And I've seen it many times over my career where other people that are bigger than our transit agencies have literally wiped off the map because the product.
Blockbuster had nothing to do with taxes. You're tax funded. You can't be wiped off the map. Okay. So he's lying. It's just, he's setting up a false comparison.
Shifted on them. Right. And so I think when you're highly capitalized like we are, we have to really become more sophisticated in understanding our customer, those patterns and the policies.
I don't like any of this. I don't like any of his point of view. Everything is market. He's market. It's got market. No. Bullshit.
And with investments from the federal, state, municipal, and local governments, demand our partners that we partner with adapt those policies to make these assets sweat and the experience increased.
God.
Thanks, Doug. I have a couple more question lines here, but before I move off this one, I want to ask about your bridge. Another area of innovation, the Tillicum Bridge, which is car-free. It's for pedestrians, bikes, and transit. How's that doing?
Well, I want to give credit to Neil McFarland, my predecessor, and the whole team here. It's a frickin' cool bridge, right?
And so
I live not too far away.
It completely serves the tiniest minority of Portland residents. It's a cool looking bridge. Oh, yippee. For 120 million or whatever, they made it look nice. It's got no utilitarian purpose. Yeah, bicycles and people walk, tourists.
Away from it. And, it for those who don't know anything about this bridge, yes, it's car free. So it's a streetcar, it's trimets, buses, trimets, trains, it's cycling, it's walking, it's the combination of the cocktail that you want, right?
Yeah, right.
And what's really cool underneath it, the river that runs underneath it, the Willamette, the colors at night change based on the temperature of the water. So it's a pretty skookum bridge, and it's very quickly become iconic, as deservedly so. So it's serving its purpose, and it's also a part of the iconic culture of this region now.
You're a talker.
Doug, Portland also is the pioneer in, early adopter to light rail. It was a streetcar pioneer. And there are some skeptics out there, streetcars, for example. What would you say to the skeptics?
Well, again, I can only use my own experience. And so the context is my background before I tell you what I believe. So I've run the largest automated light rail system in the world, done commuter rail, done light rail, done BRT, and buses. So at the end of that, I'm actually agnostic to technology. And so whereas rail in particular, as we all know, is very emotional for a lot of people. Each one brings different values and benefits. So I feel like we're having the carpenter conversation that if all I have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I'm agnostic to the technology. I'm evidence-based personally. Light rail has some great values, but you better protect it so it optimizes the benefits it brings when you make those investments. The same thing for automated light rail. So it is a higher capacity before you get to subway, right? So there's a stair step of capacities and experiences that you're buying, and sometimes there's trade-offs. The closer one now is how BRT overlays to it, and there's different degrees of BRT. Dedicated lane, not dedicated lane, etc. Based on the investments, what speeds do you want to buy, and how much you're prepared to pay for it, and how much demand will come with it. So, I don't lock in on a technology. I must say, at some point, you start to get to a technology selection. So you start to pick. It's kind of like Southwest Airlines. They run 737s because there's some cost benefits upstream in the life cycle of them, rather than all these double parts inventory technologies are changing. The amount of training you got to invest in multiple technologies could be very expensive. So once you get to a rail technology, you probably want to leverage that to a pretty substantial degree, but it doesn't mean LRT solves something that a commuter rail's attributes may otherwise do. So I don't lock in on technology, and I'd say, and sometimes the numbers need to change. BRT is helpful because it's creating competition for the suppliers of light rail to reinvent too, right? And so you also get a longer life cycle on a bigger capital expenditure. So you have to look at things on a life cycle basis. And also there's a TOD side to this, where rail, typically an investment of streetcar rail, brings a bigger capital investment draw from the private sector that they're going to be there for the long term versus what BRT might. I think that's more of a North American phenomenon, why it's not accepted. Europe's, I think, frankly, way ahead of us.
Oh, no kidding.
Doug, I want to weave in the question of fare policy, because, there's so many things Portland is ahead of the curve on, and this is another one. You've been
Nothing like having a cheerleader for your interviewer. It's just horrible when you have to listen to this stuff. And there's no other objective point of view other than rah rah, shish boom bah, you're the greatest person who ever lived.
The fare collection aspect of it, you've been, very innovative, the mobile ticketing, but also on the things like fare capping, the social equity part of it. And if I can weave in a tangential question in that mix, Doug, is with the non-destination riders. And,
Wow.
that is a challenge for transit, homeless populations, et cetera, and how to, it is related to fair policy.
This is
So
the interest. Yeah.
if I
Let's hear
could
this. Let's hear this.
throw all those questions at you at once, Doug, and let you sort of.
That's why they do the fair enforcement. You know that, right? It's because it's broken windows policing. And in broken windows policing, you find some minor infraction in which you can harass people and use it against them to get them out of sight. Okay, that's what TriMet does with the fairs. It's broken policing. They're looking for the fair. They can kick them off or whatever, cite them, harass them. Unfortunately, it's regressive in nature. It's anti-humane. It's not humane. It's horrible. Yeah, they did improve it from what it was, but it's still unacceptable. Let's hear what he says.
Wow.
Okay, well, you're the interviewer, so you get to do that. So, well, Art, we've known each other for a lot of years, so let me take the best crack at it I can. It may need a couple follow-ups, but let me riff on this for a bit. Fairs are very complex. We all know that, and the social dynamics in all cities. The social inequities intersect around transit in particular. Some of it comes down, my own belief is our service is too good to be free.
Except that's bullshit. It's not free. It's 85% paid for by general tax revenues. 85% is paid by people who probably don't use. You just said that was what? 4% of the public uses it, but they're financing it.
I believe that personally. I didn't come from a lot of money. I remember something called a piggy bank, if you remember those, where I counted my pennies and nickels and dimes up with my sweaty palm, went down to the bus and put it in the fare box and hope I had the right pennies because that's all I had, and the bus operator was going to let me on. I learned a lot of lessons from that, right, around responsibility. But I also know there's a lot of people who don't have the financial means to pay. So I don't believe in free because I don't think there is such a thing as free. Someone is going to pay.
Yeah, it's bullshit lies. It's somebody is paying. Okay, if you were 100% being funded by riders, I could accept your argument, but you're not.
And free also brings out other social complexity problems. Even when it is free today, we have a lot of homeless people running our systems from New York to LA to Portland, Oregon. So
yeah, that's because government in general has failed to provide a place for people to go. That's a bigger systemic problem of which public transportation plays a role, because there's no alternative for these people. It's a failed neoliberal government that's created this.
I do believe a proof of payment system is important,
yeah,
or a fair gated system is important.
He's a neoliberal.
Because what we do is valuable. And so,
use those paper towels.
Now that could be easily debated, and of course is. But I do ask, then why isn't our water bills free? And why aren't our hydro bills free? Why isn't I go down?
False equivalency. It's like saying, oh, well, I can just take my stuff out of the store. It's a false equivalency. And he's making these false equivalencies.
A long list of what's not free, which is even more of a staple than what we provide. So what we do provide is important, and it is of value. Now, if somebody wants to write a check to us, we're happy from another government agency who values that. We may be able to help you with a discount, which we do heavily. There are trips and traps off the retail price, but driving the retail price to zero, to me, is not good, because there are many people who value the system and who can afford to pay. So you typically want to discount where the need is, but you don't want to waste discounting, because once you discount, historically, you're not going to get that price back up very easily at all. So this...
Yeah, see, that's that neoliberal point of view. It's very destructive. His point of view is a very, very bad point of view.
Does intersect around social responsibility. We do have, the board here does have a fare capping policy that we put in place. We're losing a lot of money that's off of it, but it's also a societal contribution. We do.
This is a guy that makes $350,000 a year plus all of the perks he gets, whatever the fucking pension's going to be, at least $10,000 a month, I suppose, just like all the other ones. And here he is talking about how to handle poor people.
No, there's a whole group of advocates, and that's what advocates do, is they put their case forward and are insatiable about it. That's okay. Who ultimately, these are stair steps to get to zero.
Yes, should be zero.
Well, in crisis like we're on,
you know what they say? You don't pay to walk over the Tilikum Bridge. You don't have to pay a fare to walk over the bridge, right? You can just do it. It's been tax funded. Well, it's the same thing. The goddamn transit system is primarily tax funded. Just a tiny little bit comes from your fares. It should be abolished. And you can walk over the Tilikum for free. You should be able to get on that bus for free.
In right now, and this is not something I haven't said to other elected officials here, people like myself who have to ultimately balance the books.
Yeah.
Without a revenue injection, discounts get under pressure and are some of the first things to go before you cut service. So we used to have something.
You know, none of it makes sense. We know what the budget is for the TriMet. Huge capital projects budget, huge marketing budget, huge governmental affairs. He's gaslighting us basically. He's just making these arguments that really are not valid.
Here in the last recession called Fairless Square. And I remember coming down, I wasn't at TriMet at the time and seeing it. Boy, I'll tell you, it was a problem. Yeah, it was free, but I saw sleeping bags and tents and all kinds of stuff I never even thought existed.
Yeah, see, it's all about social control. It's social control. They're just controlling the masses. It's always about social control. All of this neoliberal shit is about social control. And that's why we as a society are in a cesspool of inhumanity right now. It's because of people like Doug who've created this cesspool we all live in. It might be nice to think Trump created it, but he didn't create it. He came into the cesspool when the cesspool was already at its highest.
In the trains, not just on the platforms near them. So it has some other complications, unfortunately, that come with it. Transit can contribute to the social problem. It's not going to solve it in my mind, Art. There are other urban policies that I think the world is trying to work through, not just transit. But I think we have to be careful that we don't become rolling homeless camps either. Yeah. We need to be part of the contribution. Pricing is an instrument. To me, is not that instrument. But I think you discount preciously to the behaviors you're trying to
see. He's neoliberal to the core. Neoliberal. It's all about social control. He just says it right out. He's not interested in the greater good. He's interested in social control.
Great, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all of them. You know, I don't need if I'm not in transit, I have financial means that I can pay for transit, and I'm happy to pay. And many other people are as well. So we need to protect free and minimize who really needs it and for how long. And so if we get to dynamic...
You know, these people would have a little bit more credibility if their discounted fare pass actually included a free component for people that don't have any income. And it has no component for a transit pass without you putting in some of your money. So even the poorest of the poor have to pay to ride TriMet. And that's why this conversation is basically of no value to anybody.
Pricing also, and this is an example where I think the industry has to evolve. We don't do TDM very well. We talk about it as an industry, for your listeners at home, that's transportation demand management. I'm used to being in the oil industry, the ultimate in pricing competition, where you've got 3-foot signs on every street corner, and I used to change gasoline prices 4 times a day per service station per pump. That's competition. We run our industry a bit like a semi-utility. We don't change our prices very often, so I think there's an opportunity to get to dynamic pricing to shape and minimize our capital investments. Hey, Art, if you're willing to take the 7 o'clock train, I'll give you 10 cents off. That's where I think you could shape things, not just from fare.
See, they're using money as a means of manipulating the masses. This is the neoliberals. He's 100% neoliberal.
Pricing, but also from bonus and loyalty programs. My boss and I in Canada, and I'll give you one hard example and I'll stop.
Should be no bonus and loyalty programs for public transit. This is ridiculous.
We actually introduced the first loyalty program when I was in Canada, when I was at Shell, the very first one. And we were shocked. We actually got a 5% market share increase. 5. for zero capital dollars by introducing it. And it also, loyalty programs are everywhere now. So this is when dinosaurs roamed the earth many years ago, but it showed you the power of loyalty if you put on a value proposition.
It's got nothing to do with public transportation, okay? If I use my credit card, they'll give me cash back. That's up to me. It's got nothing to do with public transportation. Zero.
Beyond just discounting your price. Because you can't win with just discounting your price to oblivion. The receivers have to go, hey, great, thanks. But they don't have to balance the book and provide all the extra services that we've just all talked about. So protect your price, target where it needs to go. There are some social parts that do need support. Veterans, those with disabilities, and others. But then protect it and fight for it for those who don't.
Yeah, right.
Doug, I tell you, you've sparked so much in me that I could go on with many more questions. I do want to conclude with one, though, and that's about measuring transit's value and the metrics for doing so. And, ridership has been a convenient metric over the years. You have a number and you can gauge your performance, so to speak, but it's probably never been exactly right. It's one metric, but not the only one. What would you say would be perhaps a better way to measure, and more holistic way to measure transit's value?
I think I'm a big believer in Kaplan Norton's work on balanced scorecard. I can be safe but out of business. But I know if I'm not safe, at least if I am safe, then I have a chance to be in business. So I think that from a balanced scorecard perspective, I think I've always been a believer in what do the users think, not to what we think. It's not we have to get past being a supply-based formula to more of a demand-based formula. This is back to the ops versus customer culture and language. So one thing I measure, and I know in the private sector we did, is market share. How much through all the programs and the way you put your offerings together, and whether you spent $1 billion or $3, how many people did you get on your system relative to all the other choices of mobility in that marketplace? If that's 100%, walking, cycling, taking your car, how many people with our net offering chose us? Same thing for cycling and walking. So I think that's a very good metric. And I gave you examples where others around the world are literally 10 times we are, and Portland's doing a heck of a job here in the United States. But we're still 10 times less than what some of the other places are in the world through their combined policies and investments and performance. So that's one of them. The other one is customer satisfaction surveys. I used and introduced many years ago, and I brought this over from other private sector, mystery shoppers. So so very low cost, great ways to have anytime, anywhere, not just when the boss, she or he shows up, around measuring and quantifying the actual experience based on really quantified measurements that are available to all, and sharing those results. When I introduced that in Vancouver, BC many years ago, we started at 44, the cleaners and
you got fired from BC.
Others were getting like a 50 or 60% score, and the executive walked down the hall and said, "Oh, these data's all wrong. It's a dumb idea." Well, now they were in the 90s, high 90s. They didn't play with the data to get what they wanted. We fixed it to actually get people wearing uniforms, smiling, cleaning, and saying, "Hey, how can I help you?" So many multi-industries use that as another tool. But other metrics around also our community awareness and perception. We do our customer and our regional perception. How do we stack up and compete every year against the other government agencies in this region? Right now, TriMet is at the top of every municipality and government service in this region. But like treading water, you stop, you sink. So we have to keep reinventing ourselves to be relevant. So there's the public perception, who writes your taxpayer check. There's the user perceptions. My point is we need many, I call them listening posts. And don't rely on one, because one can lead you with bad data. But usually if I'm an aggregate of balance, i.e. in balanced scorecard, let the customer lead you in experience and innovation, and then you've got a policy should support a great experience. It shouldn't snuff it out. And so I think that's where customers, this industry needs to get more sophisticated personally in looking at things like psychographics, not just demographics and basics. We need the technology of our smart cards to get us there, to give us the confidence to lead with that, not follow with it after investments at the government level. So those kinds of metrics, I think, are really vital. And then the other quadrants, which I won't tie your time onto, the one I will share that I've kind of been alone on in the industry for many years, but I did it in Vancouver, is your net operating cost per passenger mile or kilometer if you're international, right? The net operating cost per operating passenger mile. So that reflects deadhead time, the cost, the revenues, the expenses over the distance you travel. It's a bit scary, but I'll tell you, it's the closest thing to a P&L that I have been able to come up with in my working career. And it really helped shape my team around, is this investment better than this one? It forces you to trade those things off with, historically, the capital pipe is different than the other pipe, and no one really pulls it together. So the more we can do that, then you start to get to return on investment for initiatives to drive ridership, initiatives to don't invest this, do this, to drive value. So I'll leave it there on the financial quadrant, but there's others.
Hey, great insights, Doug. I've certainly enjoyed.
All right, I've had enough. I don't want to hear the commentator's last remarks. Okay, you heard him. 100% neoliberal transit manager, looking at everything through the eyes of neoliberalism. And that's why it's a fail. And that's why we're in the situation we're in the world right now, because people like Doug Kelsey, these people have created this hellhole, and he's part of that problem.